I put a poll up on my community tab the other day asking you all if you thought the standard of F1 drivers is higher today than it used to be, and 71% of you said it was. Now, I have to say I'm with the 71%, but with 13% of you saying the standards are lower and 16% saying that it's the same, I thought this subject would be worth making a video on. So, are F1 drivers getting better? Let's talk about it, shall we? So first of all, let's talk about pay drivers. There have always been pay drivers in F1, but back in the 1950s, almost the whole grid were pay drivers. A lot of them just bought cars from the manufacturers like Maserati, Alfa Romeo or Ferrari, and there were very few checks to see if they were any good. Put simply, it was first come, first served. Now, we did have some fantastic drivers around that time. Drivers such as Juan Manuel Fangio, Giuseppe Farina, Alberto Ascari, and of course, Stirling Moss. But these great drivers shared the grid with ones like Ottorino Volontario, who, just so you know, I made a video on right at the start of this channel, and although my voice hadn't yet broken in it, I have linked it in the top right hand corner. Overall, the 1950s was a weird time for F1, with the drivers not having any barriers to entry bar having to pay an entry fee of £5. Adjusted for inflation, that would be around £200, which when compared to modern F1 standards is pocket change. And speaking of pocket change, this video is sponsored by The Ridge. The Ridge makes some of the coolest wallets I've ever seen, and after I received my own wallet in this gorgeous forged carbon look, I have to say it's as useful as it is cool to look at. The wallet is way smaller than my phone, so it's super easy for me to put it in my pocket and just forget about it, which solved one of my main issues with carrying around a wallet in the first place. I mean, look how big my old wallet is compared to the Ridge one. The wallet also has RFID blocking technology, which is always great for peace of mind. But something you might not know is that the Ridge also makes something called the key case, and although maybe I don't get as much utility out of it as I do the wallet, I've really appreciated not being stabbed by my house keys like I used to. And something I wasn't really prepared for was the fact that people suddenly become interested in your keys. So if you want to get yourself a fancy new wallet or a key case or even both, then head to ridge.com/JohnWarren to get the best offer, and you can save up to 40% if you buy before December the 22nd. But as well as the £200 entry fee to race in F1, there was another price. Death. Many F1 drivers passed away at the wheel in the early years of the sport as the FIA didn't really care about safety. If you wanted to win races, you had to be prepared to die. And as a result, just getting out of the car at the end of every race was a huge achievement. And although F1 drivers still run a risk when they get into the car now, there's a huge difference between the safety of today's cars and the safety of the metal coffin on wheels. So, while there wasn't a skill-based barrier to entry, meaning you didn't actually have to be any good, most of the drivers were decent enough to not crash, which is something a few of the drivers on this year's grid should think long and hard about. Anyway, since the 1990s, the FIA have operated a super license system. This has been modified slightly throughout the years, but the gist remains that you have to be competent to be an F1 driver. As a result, the worst F1 driver on the grid this year would probably score a podium every race if put up against a grid from the 50s, and to be honest, they'd stand a chance at winning. But when I asked the question about F1 drivers getting better, I didn't just mean from the start to now, because I think that's an obvious fact. What I really want to talk about is the progression. Has there been any noticeable improvement between, say, 2000 and 2022? And to be honest, the answer is it depends. The dominant driver in 2000 was Michael Schumacher, and we've just come out of an era of domination from Lewis Hamilton. Both of these drivers are main players in any argument over who the greatest F1 driver of all time is, having each won 7 championships. But at the risk of causing a huge fight in the comment section, I'm going to say that Lewis Hamilton is a slightly better driver. But I'm not going to say something like that without backing myself up, so let me just do that. First of all, let me just point out that Lewis Hamilton never felt the need to win a championship by crashing. That puts him ahead of Senna, Prost, and yes, Schumacher. Lewis has always won on merit, and had things gone slightly differently in 2007, 2016, and 2021, he could have 10 world championships by now. And even in the years which he didn't have a car capable of winning championships, he still won races. I won't say he's the greatest of all time because I don't know who will follow him, but I will stand by my opinion that Michael Schumacher is only a close second to him. But 2 very dominant drivers are sort of anomalous here. What about everyone else? Well, I've sort of covered it already, but let's talk about the worst drivers on the grid. And this one is pretty clear to me. Although Latifi is having an awful season and is easily the worst driver this year, he's still miles better than someone like Taki Inoue, who claims to be the worst F1 driver ever. His words, not mine. So, the standard at the front is around the same or a little higher, and the standard at the back is miles better. This says to me that the barriers to entry for F1 are getting stricter, which is for the better, while the best F1 drivers in the sport are sort of at a ceiling, where they can't physically be any better. I have no way of proving the latter, but I think it's worth noting that we've reached a limit where the top drivers are getting so much out of the car that the car can't physically go any faster. So, aside from the super license, why is everyone so much better? Well, the most important point I can make here is preparation. The amount of money that parents are pumping into taking their kids karting every weekend means these kids are growing up so much more talented than they would have even in the 90s. Of course, natural talent isn't something that will have changed. I mean, humans don't evolve to drive F1 cars faster, but the overall talent thanks to frequent practice is a lot higher. This overall increase in talent means that there's more of a chance of any given driver being good enough to race in F1, and we'll get onto what I mean by that in a second. Another reason is the huge increase in the popularity of motorsport among children recently. With more kids into motorsport, there will be more kids doing grassroots karting, and therefore the talent pool becomes wider and gives a higher chance of bringing the most talented drivers up to F1. And when they get to F1, the training program is so strict that they'll show up to every race in peak physical condition. Therefore, that means they're more likely to do well in a race, and obviously that makes them better than older, perhaps fatter F1 drivers. So what did I mean by good enough to race in F1? Well, the F1 super license system means that you have to be a very good driver to even get a license, but there are plenty of people with a super license who aren't good enough for F1. Nikita Mazepin, for example. F1 teams demand a lot from their drivers, and so if they get to F1 and simply aren't good enough, they won't last long. This process of constantly weeding out the bad drivers means that driving standards are pretty much constantly improving year on year, although the overall cycle probably follows a trend like this. And that's probably why some of you said the standards have got worse in recent years, because if we look back to say 2012, you'd have to say that the F1 grid was at an all-time high. I mean, we had 8 drivers over the course of the season, and although we had a couple of not so great drivers on the grid, there were more seats available, so the top 20 drivers were, in my opinion, better than the current standard this year, even if it's just by a bit. That said, in keeping with the trend, I think the standards in the next few years will be improving massively. Sure, we're losing Sebastian Vettel, but we're also dropping Nicholas Latifi, Daniel Ricciardo, and Mick Schumacher, which means the grid has the potential to get significantly better. And plus, we have drivers like Lando Norris, George Russell, and Charles Leclerc, who I don't think are in their primes yet. When they do reach their prime, I think it'll be pretty clear cut that the grid will be better than the 2012 one. So, to those people who think driving standards are lower now than in the past, I don't think you're wrong. You're probably just looking at a different point on the imaginary graph. So yeah, hopefully all that waffle made sense, and even if it didn't, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then leave a like and subscribe if you're new. Thanks to The Ridge for sponsoring this video, and thanks to you for supporting the people who support me. Thank you for watching, and I will hopefully see you very soon. Bye!